Welcome to another edition of Clouds of Torah. Today we are going to deal with, is Lucifer the king of Babylon? As mentioned in Isaiah 14:12. There are many teachings on who Satan is and where he is mentioned in the Bible from the Old and the New Testament. And most people are familiar with Isaiah 14:12. Also, there's teachings of, is Satan the serpent in Genesis 3:14? Is Satan the devil in Matthew 4:1? Is Satan the great dragon, the great red dragon in Revelation 12:6 and 7? Is Satan the cherub in Ezekiel 28:14? I have already done a lesson on Ezekiel 28:14 on Clouds of Torah on my YouTube page, so you can check that out. I have a lesson on Genesis 3:14 and 15, if you want to check that out. As far as him being the devil in Matthew 4:1, I don't have a lesson specifically on that, but I do cover some of that information in my Genesis 3:14 lecture. And also in the book is did Jesus crush the head of the serpent in Genesis? So, and also is Satan the great red dragon in Revelation 12? That's also mentioned in my Genesis 3:14 lesson. So let's get into this, and why it's so significant is because if this is not Satan in Isaiah 14:12, why is that taught? Where does that even come from? It's because of this word Lucifer, and we're going to see exactly who or what Lucifer is. Who is Lucifer in Isaiah 14:12? This comes from the Strong's 1966. It says Lucifer in the translation, but the word there is Hallel. From Halal in the sense of brightness, the morning star, Lucifer. 1984 in the Strong's Halal. Englishman's Concordance, one occurrence. So we only see this word one time in the whole Tanakh. And it's interesting that Lucifer would mean brightness or some type of light, right? Because if you ask somebody who speaks Spanish, how do you say light? They're going to say luz, right? So let's deal with this a little deeper. We see another form of the word Hallel in the word praised. In 1 Chronicles 16:36, it says, the people said amen and praised the Lord. So why would the word for praise or brightness be translated as something that people refer to as Satan or the devil? Just a question that has to be raised, because there's no Satan here in this word at all. It doesn't have anything to do with opposition. To praise God would not to be, that wouldn't be to oppose him. That would be, a contradiction, right? Day star and shining star. This is the translations we see in Isaiah 14:12 in the New King James Version. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning. How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. In the American Standard Version, how art thou fallen from heaven, O day star, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, that didst lay low the nations? In the CSB, shining morning star, how you have fallen from the heavens, you destroyer of nations, you have been cut down to the ground. So we see some different translations here. And why doesn't any of them say Satan or devil? We're about to find out. Kalash, Strong's 25 and 22. This means to discomfit, waste away, weaken, a primitive root to prostrate, by implication to overthrow, decay, discomfit, waste away, weaken. So this is why I'm bringing this up. In Isaiah 14:12, New King James Version, how you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. So we see in Jeremiah 28:14 something that will put this in perspective. For thus said the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, I have put a yoke of iron upon the neck of all these nations, that they may serve Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and they shall serve him, and I have given him the beasts of the field also. So there's a connection between Isaiah chapter 14, as I'm going to show you, about whoever this chapter is about, who weakened the nations. It's the same one in Jeremiah 28:14. Babylon is said to have had all the nations with a yoke of iron upon their necks from the Most High. That's how the king of Babylon weakened the nations. So you can say, well, it says, Lucifer, you're the one that's cut down. You're the one who weakened the nations. Well, once we find out who or what Lucifer is, you're going to realize that the king of Babylon is the one who weakened the nations in Isaiah 14:12. So let's get some context of Isaiah 14, starting at verse 1. Take up this proverb against the king of Babylon. See, when you cherry pick the scriptures, then there's a lot of stuff that can get overlooked. Isaiah 14:1-4. For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob and will still choose Israel and settle them in their own land. Are they not in their own land? What is going on here? The strangers will be joined with them, and they will cling to the house of Jacob. Then people will take them and bring them to their place in the house of Israel, possess them for servants and maids in the land of the Lord. They will take them captive, whose captives they were, and rule over their oppressors. It shall come to pass in the day the Lord gives you rest from your sorrow. What sorrow? And from your fear and the hard bondage in which you were made to serve, that you will take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, how the oppressor has ceased, the golden city ceased. Israel has to be settled in their own land because they were slaves in Babylon. Remember when it says somebody weakened the nations? Well, Israel wasn't the only one. Remember, it says, all these nations I will put a yoke of iron upon their necks, and they will serve the king of Babylon. Well, Israel was one of them. That's why they had to be resettled in their own land. And that's why it says he will give you rest from your sorrow and from your fear and hard bondage in which you were made to serve. So take up this proverb against the king of Babylon. How the oppressor has ceased. Yes, it's talking about the king of Babylon was this oppressor and one who weakened the nations. So let's keep going. Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. 2 Kings 20:18. And they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. So we got a prophecy telling Israel that they're going to go into bondage into Babylon. And when you open up Daniel chapter 1, it confirms this. Daniel 1:1-2. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, and some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. So we see Babylon came, smashed on Jerusalem, and what did he do? He took the treasures out the temple. They destroyed the temple, and this prophecy of their sons taken into Babylon is fulfilled when you read Daniel further. So let's see. To bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants. This is the prophecy fulfilled that we just read about. The king of Babylon will take some of your sons and take them to Babylon. Daniel 1:3-4. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. So we see the prophecy fulfilled of the king's sons will be taken to Babylon. Clear as day. The whole earth is at rest and quiet. So if we continue in Isaiah 14, 5 through 9, what does this mean? The whole earth is at rest and quiet. Isaiah 14, 5 through 9. The Lord has broken the staff of the wicked, the scepter of the rulers. He who struck the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he who ruled the nations in anger, is persecuted and no one hinders. The whole earth is at rest and quiet. So who struck the people in wrath with a continual stroke, and who ruled the nations in anger? Was this Nebuchadnezzar, the one who had all the nations in the yoke of iron, who weakened the nations? When we read further up to Isaiah 14:12, Zechariah 1, 11 through 12. And they answered the Lord, and they answered the angel of the Lord that stood among the myrtle trees and said, we have walked to and fro through the earth, and behold, all the earth sitteth still and is at rest. Then the angel of the Lord answered and said, O Lord of hosts, how long wilt thou not have mercy on Jerusalem and on the cities of Judah against which thou hast had indignation these 70 years, or these 70 years? So when it says, behold, all the earth sitteth still is at rest, Babylon has been destroyed. When you read Zechariah chapter 1, from verse 1, it's talking about what happened. So when the Medes and the Persians took over Babylon, Israel was allowed to go back home. So there was a point in time where there was no problems from Babylon because the Medes and the Persians took over. And that's why the whole earth was at rest and quiet, because Babylon was destroyed, the one who weakened the nations. So putting this all together, so far we don't see anything about Satan. We see the King Nebuchadnezzar, we see Babylon, we see the nations being dealt with. Not one word about Satan. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom. So to back up a little bit, when I said that the Medes took over Babylon, here's the proof. Zechariah chapter 1, verse 1. In the 8th month of the 2nd year of Darius. We know Zechariah was a prophet in the time of the Second Temple period. Well, that could only come about after Babylon. So we see in Daniel 5:30 through 31, that very night Belshazzar, king of the Chaldeans, was slain, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. What kingdom was that? Babylon, where the Chaldeans resided. So Belshazzar was a grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. So just to tie up the previous slide about the whole earth being at rest and quiet because Babylon was destroyed, and it tells you that it was during the time of the Medes and the Persians. This is what's going on. Read Zechariah chapter 1. It coincides with Daniel chapter 5, 30 through 31. Since you were cut down. What does this mean, since you were cut down? Isaiah 14, 8 through 9. So far, starting from Isaiah chapter 14, verse 1, we don't see nothing about Satan. So let's continue. Isaiah 14, 8 through 9. They break forth into singing. Indeed, the cypress trees rejoice over you, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, since you were cut down, no woodsman has come against us. Hell from beneath is excited about you, to meet you at your coming. It stirs up the dead for you, all the chief ones of the earth. It has raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. So here we go. See, it says hell. It talks about, it stirs up the dead for you, right? This has got to be talking about the devil, and the word hell is there. So since you were cut down, what does it mean since you were cut down from where? From heaven? No. The kings of the earth are likened to trees that cover the earth. We see this in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. We see this about Pharaoh. We see this about Assyria. We see this about Tyre. Nations are likened to things that cover things. They oversee things like a tree. Daniel 4:14. He cried aloud and said thus, hew down the tree and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves and scatter his fruit. Let the beast get away from under it and the fowls from his branches. What happened in that dream? It says Nebuchadnezzar was the tree in the dream and his height reached from the heavens, right? His height was all the way up to the heavens. So since he was likened as a tree, he was cut down. That's what it's talking about. Because Daniel chapter 4 is about who? The king of Babylon. So Isaiah 14 and Daniel chapter 4, same person. Same kingdom, Babylon. So what does it mean hell from beneath is excited about you? Did he go to hell? Well, we know the word hell can be translated as pit and as grave. Is this the same type of hell in the New Testament? Depends on the context. But let's see this language in other places in the Tanakh. Your pomp is brought down to Sheol. The maggot is spread under you and worms cover you. So we got to realize the language of the Tanakh. Isaiah is one of the most poetic prophets. So it says in Isaiah 14:10-11, they all shall speak and say to you, have you become as weak as we? Remember, this is the same person who weakened the nations. Have you become like us? Is this talking about the devil? Is Satan? Has Satan become like us? Right? Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, and the sound of your string instruments. The maggot is spread under you, and worms cover you. So if Satan is a spirit, why would he be concerned with maggots and worms? It sounds like a man would have that problem. Not a devil, not a spiritual being, not a fallen angel, right? Did he turn into a man? Did he become a man? What's going on? So let's see this language going on in Isaiah and other places, right? The worms cover them. Job 21:22-26. Will any teach God knowledge, seeing that he judges those who are on high? Is that talking about demons and devils, or just kings of the earth who have power over the earth, who are likened as trees on high, who can be cut down because their heights reach the heavens, like Nebuchadnezzar's dream? Verse 23, one dies in his full vigor, being wholly at ease and secure, his pails full of milk, and the marrow of his bones moist. Another dies in bitterness of soul. Talking about people dying, right? It's not talking about demons and devils. They have bones, right? They drink milk. Never having tasted prosperity, they lie down alike in the dust, and the worms cover them. Sounds like people. Doesn't sound like demons or devils on high. It just sounds like people who lie down in the dust and the worms cover them. Job 24:19-20. As drought and heat evaporate, melting snow, that's what Sheol does with sinners. The womb will forget them. Maggots will find them to be a delicacy. They won't be remembered anymore. Their iniquity will be cut to pieces like firewood. So we see Sheol, we see worms, and we see maggots describing what happens to people. not demons and devils and fallen angels. So we see this language in other places of the Tanakh. The sound of your stringed instruments, Isaiah 14:10 through 11. They all shall speak and say to you, have you also become as weak as we? Have you become like us? Your pomp is brought down to Sheol, and the sound of your stringed instruments. What is it? What instruments? What's going on? Your pomp is brought down to Sheol. Your arrogance is brought down to the grave. You've become like us. You're just a man. You're going to die. The maggots and the worms are going to eat you too. You wasn't that hot. The Most High gave you everything and he took it from you. As we read in Daniel chapter 4, when Nebuchadnezzar himself says the Most High gives it to whom he wills, and he's able to bring down the arrogant. Go and read Daniel chapter 4. Describes all of this. So what is this sound of these string instruments? The sound of your string instruments, Daniel 3:7. So at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the horn, flute, harp, and lyre, and symphony with all kinds of music, all the people, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the gold image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar set up idolatry, and he had music played in order to worship that image. So when it says your pomp is brought down to the grave or to Sheol and the sound of your string instruments, your arrogance was brought down to the grave and your idols and your images as well, which was ushered in by the sound of your instruments. He made everybody worship that statue. And this is where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came in. They say, you know what, King? We're not going to worship your statue. And that's when they got thrown into the fire. Y'all know the story. Go read Daniel chapter 3 in its entirety. So Babylon was known for their images. And since that kingdom was brought down to Sheol, then we see the sound of the instruments came down with them. Isaiah 14:13 through 16. I will ascend into heaven. I will ascend into heaven. What does this mean? For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms? Is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms? Is Satan a man? Or is he a fallen angel? And way back in Isaiah, he was shaking kingdoms and making the earth tremble? Or was this the same king of Babylon that the Most High put all the nations under a yoke of iron and put him as their head, that they all had to serve him? Because it says the nation that will not serve the king of Babylon will be punished. So, I will ascend into heaven. Well, this is coming from a very arrogant person. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. He was already likened as a tree that was already in heaven, but he didn't want to stop there. He wanted more than that. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. His throne was already in the heavens, so to speak, in Daniel chapter 4 when he's described as being that tree. But that wasn't good enough for him. He wanted it all, like Warren G. He wanted it all. And that arrogance is what got him brought down, as we're going to see. Your greatness has grown and reaches to the heavens. Daniel 4:20 through 22. The tree that you saw, which grew and became strong, whose height reached to the heavens, and which could be seen by all the earth, whose leaves were lovely and its fruits abundant, in which was food for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and whose branches of the birds of the heaven had their home. It is you, O King, who have grown and become strong, for your greatness has grown and reaches to the heavens, and your dominion to the end of the earth. But that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough. He wanted it all. When you read Daniel chapter 4, what happened to Nebuchadnezzar? What happened to the king of Babylon in Daniel chapter 4? Wasn't there a decree by the watchers? Wasn't there a decree by the watchers and the holy ones against him for his pride and arrogance? Go back and read Daniel chapter 4, and then read Isaiah chapter 14, and you will definitely see the connection. Let's continue. His spirit was hardened in pride. Daniel 5:19 through 22. And because of the majesty he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Didn't we just read about somebody who made the nations tremble? Who is this talking about in Daniel 5? Whomever he wished, he executed. Whomever he wished, he kept alive. Whomever he wished, he set up. And whomever he wished, he put down. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened in pride, he was disposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Who's they? Then he was driven from the sons of men. His heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God rules in the kingdom of men and appoints over it whomever he chooses. But you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, although you knew all this. So, if we go back to Isaiah 14, who made the nations tremble? Is this the same person in Daniel 5? Who had all peoples and nations and languages trembling? I mean, this is word for word. All peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Who is this talking about? Belshazzar's father, because it says, but you, his son, Belshazzar. Well, whose son is he? Was it the king of Babylon? Because doesn't Isaiah 14 start off saying, take up this proverb against the king of Babylon? So where is Satan in all this? Where is Lucifer in all of this? Where is he at? We're going to see why the word Lucifer was there to begin with. But we'll get to that. But when his heart was lifted up, so to backtrack one more time, Daniel 4:30, the king spoke, saying, is not this great Babylon that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty? You see how arrogant he got? We read that the Most High gave him those kingdoms and that power. And the Most High puts over it whom he wills. The Most High put those nations under the yoke of iron. But here is Nebuchadnezzar bragging that I have built for a royal dwelling by my mighty power and for the honor of my majesty. Head swollen, right? Head is swollen, and he had to pay for that. That's why he was brought down. That's why he was brought down, because he thought he was more than he was. And he realized that. Read Daniel chapter 4 from the beginning to end. And he tells you, yeah, basically in so many words, he got checked out of his own mouth. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol. Now it's interesting It don't say nothing about an angel grabbing him up and throwing him in the pit for 1,000 years or calling him a dragon. None of that. Isaiah 14, 15 through 16. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. Those who see you will gaze at you and consider you, saying, is this the man who made the earth tremble, who shook kingdoms? Remember in Daniel 5 when it says, who had the whole earth trembling and had all the kingdoms under him? When did Satan do that? Or does it actually say it was the king of Babylon, starting in Isaiah chapter 14? Does it actually say who Belshazzar's father was, who went through this? And if you know who Belshazzar's father was, then you realize he was also a king of Babylon. So in context, read Isaiah 14, read Daniel chapter 4, actually read Daniel chapter 3, 4, and 5. And in context, we're talking about the same kingdom here. This is all Babylon. Let them go down alive into hell. So every time we see the word Sheol in the pit and hell, oh, that got to be the devil. Well, this language is through the Tanakh. So what happens in the Psalms when it says in Psalm 55:15, let death seize them, let them go down alive into hell, for wickedness is in their dwellings and among them. Is this also Satan, the devil? He got whoever this is talking about, let them go down alive into hell, right? Psalm 55:23. But you, O God, shall bring them down to the pit of destruction. Bloodthirsty and deceitful men shall not live out half of their days, but I will trust in you. So we see men. Didn't it say in Isaiah 14? You are a man. This is the man who shook kingdoms. You are a man brought down to Sheol. So here we see, you shall bring them down to the pit of destruction, bloodthirsty and deceitful men. Let death seize them, let them go down alive into hell. This is talking about people. This is not talking about demons and devils. This language is in other places besides Isaiah. So when you see hell and Sheol in the pit, don't automatically start thinking that's got to be talking about Satan or the devil. No, that's not what's up. Her steps lay hold of hell. Proverbs 5:3-5. For the lips of an immoral woman drip honey, and her mouth is smoother than oil. But in the end she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lay hold of hell, or Sheol, or the grave. So this language is basically just telling you that this lifestyle leads to the grave and death. That's all it means when you see you will be brought down to hell and destruction. Now, I'm not saying there's not a literal hell, but in this context of what we're talking about, it's just saying you're going to be brought down to the grave. As we know, Nebuchadnezzar was brought down to the grave. His kingdom ended as prophesied, and the Medes and the Persians took over Babylon, as we read in the end of Daniel chapter 5. So don't get excited when you see hell and automatically think that has to be talking about Satan or Lucifer. No, because Satan is not Lucifer. And neither is the king of Babylon, Lucifer, but he was just likened to a shining star. As we see the other translations tell you, a bright and morning star. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more too. In the day when it went down to hell. So we see the king of Babylon being told, your pomp is brought down to Sheol, or hell, or the grave. This is the language that describes basically your throne is done. the Most High is going to destroy your kingdom. So same language in Ezekiel 31. Talking about a whole different king, but the same result. Ezekiel 31, 1 through 2. Now it came to pass in the 11th year, in the 3rd month, on the 1st day of the month, that the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, say to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitude, whom are you like in your greatness? So let's skip down to verse 15 through 17. Thus said the Lord God, in the day when it went down to hell, I caused mourning. I covered the deep because of it. I restrained its rivers, and the great waters were held back. I caused Lebanon to mourn for it, and all the trees of the field wilted because of it. I made the nation shake at the sound of its fall, when I cast it down to hell, together with those who descended into the pit. Is this talking about Satan and the devil? Or Satan, the devils, the demons, and all this stuff? No. What went down into the pit? What was cast down to hell? This is talking about Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So now is Pharaoh, king of Egypt, also Satan or Lucifer? Because we see the words hell and pit? Nope. And all the trees of Eden, the choice and best of Lebanon, all that drink water, were comforted in the depths of the earth. They also went down to hell with it, with those slain by the sword. That's how you go to hell, or the grave. You get killed by the sword. And those who were its strong men dwelt in its shadows among the nations. So, in context, when we see in Isaiah chapter 14 that the king of Babylon is being brought down to Sheol and put in a pit, same language is talking about Pharaoh. In the day when it went down to hell, clear as day, when I cast it down to hell together with those who descend into the pit. So cross references make a lot of sense. We're talking about a king in Isaiah 14. We're talking about a king in Ezekiel 31. We're talking about hell being the reason, or they're being cast down into hell or the pit or their grave because of their arrogance. Same situation. They also went down to hell with it, with those slain by the sword. Regular people who died went to hell or the grave. This is not demons and devils. Let's put everything in context, and it makes a lot more sense. Then I will bring you down with those who descend into the pit. Same type of language in Ezekiel 26, verse 20. Then I will bring you down with those who descend into the pit, to the people of old, and I will make you dwell in the lowest part of the earth, in places desolate from antiquity, and those who go down to the pit, so that you may never be inhabited, and I shall establish glory in the land of the living. Who is Ezekiel 26 talking about? Who's going down into the pit? Who? Into the lowest part of the earth. Let's see. I am against you, O Tyre, another king who was brought down because of his arrogance. I just did a whole lesson on Ezekiel 28, verse 14. That's not talking about Satan either. Ezekiel 26 and 3. Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against you, O Tyre, and will cause many nations to come up against you, as the sea causes its waves to come up. So Ezekiel 26:20 says Tyre is going to go down to the pit, into the lowest parts of the earth. Now, that's talking about literal hell. That's not the topic right now. We're just talking about the language of nations being brought down because they have arrogant kings and they descend into the pit and hell. Not one verse about there being Satan. So that means Pharaoh would have to be Satan because he went down to the pit and to hell. Nebuchadnezzar, is he Satan too? Because he went down to the pit. The king of Tyre, is he Satan too? Because he goes down into the pit? No, these are not talking about Satan. Unless you got three different Satans, because they were all destroyed. before you even get to the New Testament. And the pastors have field days with these verses because they don't read them in context. They just see the word pit and hell, the word hell, and they don't give you the background of what these words mean and what the context is trying to tell you. So, King of Babylon, brought down to Sheol. King of Egypt, Pharaoh, brought down to Sheol. King of Tyre, brought down to the pit and to Sheol. Same situation, same type of language in context. Not a word about Satan. A little bit more information on the king of Babylon. He wasn't no joke. Ezekiel 21:21. For the king of Babylon stands at the parting of the road, at the fork of the two roads, to use divination. He shakes the arrows, he consults the images, he looks at the liver. Sound like some straight witchcraft, right? He consults the images. Remember when it says your string instruments will be brought down? So remember, he set up that image and you worshiped it with music. Well, interesting that he consults the images with music, and the prophets in the Tanakh will go into a state of prophecy by using music. So not to go too deep into that, but we see that the king of Babylon was very arrogant and he was very powerful, and we see the type of things he was into in the verses. This is not speculation. I am. So when we look at what happened to Babylon and their kingdom, we can see what they were actually into and what happened. Isaiah 47:9-10. But these two things shall come to you in a moment, in one day, the loss of children and widowhood. They shall come upon you in their fullness because of the multitude of your sorceries, for the great abundance of your enchantments. For you have trusted in your wickedness. You have said, no one sees me. Your wisdom and your knowledge have warped you, and you have said in your heart, I am, and there is no one else besides me. This is the same thing that happened to the king of Tyre. It says he was corrupted from his wisdom and of his trading and his merchants and stuff like that. But wisdom can be bad sometimes. Remember, Solomon said, don't be too wise. More wisdom, more problems. Now, speaking of language, the concept I am, John 8:58, Jesus said unto them, verily, verily, I say unto you, before Abraham was, I am. What happened to Jesus? Executed by the Romans. What happened to Babylon? Destroyed by the Medes and the Persians. Magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. We see Babylon was into some serious stuff. We see the king looking into the liver, using divination, consulting images. Daniel 5:11. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is the spirit of the holy God, and in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom, like the wisdom of the gods, were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your father the king, made him chief of the magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers. So they had different levels of people into different stuff. Magicians, astrologers, Chaldeans, and soothsayers were known for their wisdom in the so-called occult or dark arts, or however you want to term that. This was another reason that we just read, because of your enchantments, that this whole kingdom was brought down. It was a very serious indictment against them. They was into some heavy stuff, and their wisdom warped them. Like it says, wisdom can corrupt people, unfortunately. Destroyed its cities. So we go back to Isaiah 14 with all the background information that we have. When it says in Isaiah 14:17-20, who made the world as a wilderness and destroyed its cities. I don't remember Satan destroying those cities in the Tanakh. Who did not open the house of his prisoners. I don't remember Satan putting nobody in jail. All of the kings of the nations, all of them sleep in glory, everyone in his own house. Why is that important? We're going to see. But you are cast out of your grave, out of Sheol, out of the pit, like an abominable branch. Why is he called a branch? Because he was likened to a tree. Like the garment of those who are slain, thrust through with the sword, who go down to the stones of the pit, like a corpse trodden underfoot. You will not be joined with them in burial, because you have destroyed your land and slain your people. The brood of evildoers shall never be named. When did Satan have land? Jeremiah 27:11. But the nations that bring their necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, I will let them remain in their own land, says the Lord, and they shall till it and dwell in it. That's how everyone can be in their own house, all the kings of the nations, in verse 18, because it says, I will let them remain in their own land as long as they serve the king of Babylon. Clear right there in the verse. But the nations that bring their necks under the yoke of the king of Babylon and serve him, I will let them remain in their own land. Again, it's the king of Babylon who has all the nations under him. That's why he was able to weaken the nations in Isaiah 14. Verse 12. You who weaken the nations. And Isaiah 14 begins with a proverb to who? The king of Babylon, not to Satan or Lucifer. Tyre and Egypt invaded. Ezekiel 26:7. For thus says the Lord God, behold, I will bring against Tyre from the north Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, king of kings. Very interesting to note. How can you weaken the nations? Oh, if you're the king of kings, you got that kind of power. With horses, with chariots, and with horsemen, and an army with many people. That's how he was able to weaken the nations. Ezekiel 30:25. Thus I will strengthen the arms of the king of Babylon, but the arms of Pharaoh shall fall down. They shall know that I am the Lord when I put my sword in the hand of the king of Babylon, and he stretches it out against the land of Egypt. So when it says that he weakened the nations, he was weakening the big dogs. Tyre and Egypt were very serious civilizations back in the day. Tyre was a whole city, a crowning city. I do a whole lesson on them in Ezekiel, about Ezekiel 28:14. Is that Satan? On my YouTube page. So when it says the king of Babylon or Lucifer weakened the nations, we can see it in the text. This is not speculation. He dealt with some very serious people, with an army of many people is what it says. And he was called King of Kings. That's why he was likened to that tree that was above everything. That's how he was brought down or cut down, because he was likened to a tree. It had nothing to do about him falling from heaven as a fallen angel. It doesn't say that. Clearly tells you he was considered like a tree that was cut down because its height reached into the heavens. These 70 years. Zechariah 1:12-15. Then the angel of the Lord said, Lord Almighty, how long will you withhold the mercy from Jerusalem, from the towns of Judah, which you have been angry with these 70 years? So the Lord spoke kind and comforting words to the angel who talked with me. Then the angel who was speaking to me said, proclaim this word. This is what the Lord Almighty says. I am very jealous for Jerusalem and Zion, and I am very angry with the nations that feel secure. I was only a little angry, but they went too far with the punishment. So what's going on with this? What does this have to do with Isaiah 14? Jeremiah 29:10. For this is what the Lord says, when Babylon's 70 years are completed, I will take note of you and will fulfill my good promises to you by bringing you back to this place. Remember in Isaiah chapter 14, verse 1 through 4, when it talks about having to resettle Israel in their land because they were enslaved in Babylon with a 70-year decree on them? That's why they were told to take up a proverb against the king of Babylon, the oppressor. So, when you put in the context, Isaiah 14, Zechariah chapter 1, Jeremiah chapter 29, Daniel chapters 3 through 5, Babylon, 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 Babylon. Not one word about Satan. All concerning the reign of the kings of Babylon, because it was Nebuchadnezzar and his son and his son's son, who weakened the nations. Then they fell, was destroyed, and the Medes and Persians took over. And the Medes and Persians in Isaiah chapter 45, when Cyrus, king of Persia, are the ones who let Israel go back to their land. Actually, Isaiah 44, 26 through 28, leading into Isaiah 45, tell you about Cyrus being the one giving the decrees for Israel to go back. And then we read about Darius in the end of Daniel chapter 5, and Darius in the book of Ezra giving decrees for Israel to rebuild their temple, and so on and so forth. So these 70 years are significant to Babylon reigning over the world, weakening the nations, and being destroyed. That's why I bring up these 70 years. Cut off from Babylon the name. Isaiah 14, 21 to 23. Prepare slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise, nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. If this is Satan or Lucifer, he got kids now? When did that happen? For I will raise up against them the Lord of hosts, said the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and remnant and son and nephew, saith the Lord. I will also make its possession for the bittern and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the besom of destruction, said the Lord of hosts. Jeremiah 27:7. All nations shall serve him and his son and his son's son, like I said earlier, until the very time of his land come. Then many nations and great kings shall serve themselves of him. So we see his reign lasted from his son, from him and his son and his son's son. And then when he cut off the name of Babylon and remnant and son and nephew. Why? Because it says, so they don't rise and possess the land and fill the world with cities. We don't want this wickedness to spread, because Babylon was called the hammer. It says he's going to use Nebuchadnezzar to punish the nations, and then he was going to punish them. Read the book of Jeremiah. Read the book of Jeremiah. A lot of details about Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. So in conclusion, Ellicott's commentary for English readers. Let's get into this Lucifer thing. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? The word for Lucifer is literally the shining one, the planet Venus, the morning star, the son of the dawn, as the symbol of the Babylonian power. It's a symbol of Babylon, which was so closely identified with astrology. Didn't we read about the astrologers and the Chaldeans and the magicians that Daniel was chief over in Babylon? Yeah, we read that. Lucifer, etymologically, gives the same meaning and is used by, yes, Latin poets. Why Latin? For the Venus as an equivalent for the phosphorus of the Greeks. The use of the word, however, is medieval Latin as a name of Satan, whose fall was supposed to be shadowed forth in this and the following verse makes its selection here singularly unfortunate. Singularly unfortunate. Few English readers realize the fact that it is the king of Babylon and not the devil who is addressed as Lucifer. While this has been the history of the Latin word, its Greek and English equivalents have risen to a higher place, and the morning star has become a name of Christ. Revelation 22:16. The morning star has become a name of the Christ. So what people were calling the devil or Satan now has become a name of the Christ. Ellicott's commentary for English readers. I didn't make it up. Matthew Poole's commentary. O Lucifer, which properly is a bright and eminent star, which ushers in the sun and the morning, but is here metaphorically taken for the high and mighty king of Babylon. And it is a very usual thing, both in prophetical and in profane writers, to describe the princes, and potentates of the world under the title of the sun or stars of heaven. Some understand this place of the devil, to whom indeed it may be mystically applied, but as he is never called by this name in Scripture, so it cannot be literally meant of him, but of the king of Babylon, as is undeniably evident from the whole context, which certainly speaks of one and the same person and describes him as plainly as words can do it. I mean, I could have just read this from the beginning and didn't even have to do a whole lesson, to be honest. Describes him as plainly as words can do it. It's not talking about Satan. It's clearly the king of Babylon. In context, as is undeniably evident from the whole context, is what Matthew Poole's commentary tells us. That's the whole lesson right there. But y'all needed to hear all the other information. So what I think is interesting, how this word Lucifer happens to be Latin. And why is Latin important? Because guess who speaks Latin? The Romans. The Holy Roman Empire, the Church, the Vatican, Vicarius Filii Dei, right? Latin, Wikipedia.org, Wiki Lucifer. So it says Lucifer is the name of various mythological and religious figures associated with the planet Venus. Due to the unique movements and discontinuous appearances of Venus in the sky, mythology surrounding these figures often involve a fall from the heavens to earth or the underworld. Interpretations of a similar term in the Hebrew Bible, translated in the King James Version as the proper name Lucifer, led to a Christian tradition of applying the name Lucifer as its associated stories of a fall from heaven to Satan. But modern scholarship generally translate the term in the relevant Bible passage, Isaiah 14:12, as morning star or shining one, rather than as a proper name, Lucifer. As a name for the devil, the more common English is Lucifer. The more common meaning in English, Lucifer is the rendering of the Hebrew word Hallel or Halel, pronunciation Halel, in Isaiah 14:12, given in the King James Version of the Bible. The translators of this version took the word from the Latin Vulgate, Latin Wikipedia. So we see Christians and Latin-speaking people are the ones for placing a Latin word in this translation that doesn't appear nowhere else. Just in Isaiah 14:12 is where you will see Lucifer. So we see the Latin Vulgate, Latin-speaking people, the Christians or the Romans are the ones who do this. So let's end it off with some more Latin inserted in the Bible, and we're going to see who's responsible. Written in Hebrew, Greek, and, you guessed it, Latin. Wikipedia.org, Wiki, Latin, Latin, Latinum, or Lingua Latina is a classical language belonging to the Italic branch of the Indo-European languages. Latin was originally spoken in the area around Rome, known as Latium. Interesting. John 19:20. Then many of the Jews read this title for the place where Jesus was crucified near the city. And it was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Now we see how Lucifer crept into Isaiah 14:12 as a translation. That's not, the Hebrew don't say Lucifer. The Hebrew says Halel, shining one, referring to a star. So I thought the devil or Satan was a great red dragon, according to Revelation. So, I mean, in the Christian mind, they have characters that wear many, many hats. Jesus is God. He's the Son of Man. He's the angel of the Lord. He's the son of David. I mean, he just wears a lot of hats. And then Satan, he's just the king of Babylon. He's the king of Egypt. He's king of Tyre. He's the serpent in the garden. He's the dragon who fought Michael in Revelation. Like, it just doesn't stop. So, with that being said, Isaiah 14:12, Lucifer is not Satan. Lucifer is a planet or a star that Babylon used to represent itself with. And in context, Isaiah 14, from beginning to end, describes the reign of the kings of Babylon and how they were destroyed and brought down, just like Egypt, Tyre, and check your references. Look all these things up. We see that in Ezekiel 28:14, the church teaches, oh, that's Satan. Isaiah 14:12, oh, that's Satan. Well, if those are not true, what else does the church tell you that's not true? What else is the Romans telling you? Don't the Romans have their own book in the New Testament? That's kind of weird. And doesn't it say obey the superior authorities? And who was the authority at that time in the world? The Romans. Maybe that's why the Romans are not really spoken against too tough in the New Testament. But that's another conversation. So with that being said, thanks for your time. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to Clouds of Torah. Share the video. Like the video. Go to cloudsoftorah.com. Go to Amazon.com, grab some books, the False Fulfillment Citation Series, a 10-book series describing the false fulfillment citations that the New Testament writers they omit, they mistranslate, take out of context, all things trying to describe, Jesus fulfilling prophecies, and there's just nothing behind these claims when you actually read the text in context. So with that being said, shalom. Until next time, cloudsoftorah.com.